Chapter 4. The Space Being and the Iron Man. One day, there came strange news. Everybody was talking about it. Round eyes and busy mouths, frightened voices, everybody was talking about it. One of the stars of the night sky began to change. This star had always been a very tiny star of no importance at all. It had shone up there for billions and trillions and zillions of years in the constellation of Orion, that great shape of the giant hunter that strides across space on autumn and winter nights. In all its time, this tiny star had never changed in any way. Now suddenly, it began to get bigger. Astronomers peering through their telescopes noticed it at first. They watched it with worried frowns. But the tiny star was definitely getting bigger. And not just bigger, but bigger and bigger and bigger. Each night it was bigger. Bigger than the dog star, the large coloured twinkler at the heel of the hunter Orion. Bigger than Jupiter, the great blazing planet. Everybody could see it clearly, night after night, and it grew and grew and grew. They stared up with frightened faces, till at last it hung there in the sky over the world, blazing down, the size of the moon, a deep, gloomy red. And now there could only be one explanation. That star was getting bigger because it was getting nearer, and then nearer and nearer and nearer. It was rushing towards the world faster than a bullet, faster than any rocket, faster even than a meteorite. And if it hit the world at that speed, why, the whole world would simply be blasted into the twinkling of an eye. It would be like an express train hitting a bowl of goldfish. No wonder the people stared up with frightened faces. No wonder astronomers watched through their telescopes with worried frowns. But all of a sudden, a strange thing. The star seemed to have stopped. It hung there, a deep, gloomy red, just the size of the moon. It got no smaller, it got no bigger, it wasn't coming any closer, but it wasn't going away either. Now, everybody tried to explain why and how this was happening, and what was happening, and what was going to happen. And now that the next strange thing occurred. The astronomers noticed it first. In the middle of the giant star, a tiny black speck had appeared. On the second night, the speck was seen to be wriggling and much bigger. On the third night, you could see it with our telescope, a struggling black speck in the centre of that giant red gloomy star. On the fifth night, the astronomers saw it seemed to be either a bat or a black angel or a flying lizard, a dreadful silhouette flying out of the centre of that giant star straight towards the earth. What was coming out of the giant star? Each night, when the astronomers returned to their telescopes to peer up to this black flying horror, was bigger, with slow, gigantic wing beats, with long, slow writhings of its body. It was coming down through space, outlined black against its red star. Within a few more nights, its shape had completely blotted out the red star. The nameless, immense bat angel was flying down at the earth like a great black swan. It was definitely coming straight at the earth. It took several days to cover the distance. Then, for one awful night, its wings seemed to be filling most of the sky. The moon peered fearfully low on the skyline, and all the people of Earth stayed up, gazing in fear at the huge black movement of the wings that filled the night. The next morning, it landed on Australia. Brump! The shock of its landing rolled around the earth like an earthquake, spilling teacups in London, jolting pictures off walls in California, cracking statues off their pedestals in Russia. The thing had actually landed, and it was a terrific dragon. Terribly black, terribly scaly, terribly knobbly, terribly horned, terribly hairy, terribly clawed, terribly fanged, with vast, indescribable, terrible eyes, each one as big as Switzerland. There it sat, covering the whole of Australia, its tail trailing away over Tasmania into the sea, its foreclaws on the headlands of the Gulf of Carpentaria, Luckily, the mountains and hills propped up its belly clear of the valleys, and the Australians could move about in pitch darkness under this new sky, this low, weird covering of scales. They crowded towards the light that came in along its sides. Of course, whoever had been on a mountain on top when the dragon landed had been squashed flat. Nothing could be done about them. And there the horror sat, glaring out over the countries of the world. What had it come for? What was going to happen to the world now this monstrosity had arrived? Everybody waited. The newspapers spoke about nothing else. Aircraft flew near this space-bat angel dragon, taking photographs. It lay over Australia higher than any mountains, higher than the Hindu Kush in Asia, and its head alone was about the size of Italy. For a whole day, while the people of Earth trembled and wept and prayed to God to save them, the space-bat angel dragon lay resting, its chin sunk in the Indian Ocean, the sea coming not quite to the bottom of its bottom lip. But the next morning, early, its giant voice rumbled around the world. The space-bat angel dragon was speaking. It wanted to be fed. And what it wanted to eat was living things. People, animals, forests, it didn't care. It wanted to eat. So long as the food was alive. But it had better be fed quickly. Otherwise, it would roll out its tongue longer than the Trans-Siberian Railway and lick huge amounts of life off the surface of the earth, cities, forests, farmlands, whatever there was. It would leave the world looking like a charred pebble, unless it was fed quickly. Its voice shook and rumbled around the earth for a whole hour as it delivered its message. Finally, it ended and lay waiting. The peoples of the world got together. If they fed it, how could they ever satisfy it? It would never be full, and every new day it would be as hungry as ever. How can you feed a beast the size of Australia? Australia is a vast land. All the countries of Europe would fit easily into Australia. The monster's stomach alone must be the size of Germany. No, they would not feed it. The people of the world decided they would not feed this space-bat angel dragon or whatever it was. They would fight it. They would declare war on it. They would all get together and blast it off the face of the earth. And so it was that all the peoples of the earth declared war on the monster and sent out their armed forces with a grand combined operation. What a terrific attack! Rockets, projectiles of all sorts, missiles and bombs, flamethrowers, everything was tried. The smoke of the explosions drifted out over the Pacific Ocean like a black, crawling continent. The noise of the battle shook the world almost as long as the landing of the dragon had done, and for much longer. Then the noise died down, and the smoke cleared, and the peoples of the world cried in dismay. The dragon was actually smiling. Smiling. Aircraft flying daringly near photographed the vast face smiling, and the picture was in all the papers. It was smiling as if it had been well tickled. Now the peoples of the world were worried. They were all great fighters. All spent their spare money on preparing for wars, always making bigger and better weapons. Now they had tried their utmost to blast the thing off the earth. What was the result? The dragon merely smiled, and not a scratch could be seen anywhere on its body. Human weapons had no effect on it. But that wasn't surprising. This creature had come from the depth of space, out of the heart of a star. Nobody knew what it was made of. Perhaps it could not be destroyed by any means whatsoever. And now the space-bat angel dragon spoke again. It gave the peoples of the world 1 week in which to prepare its first meal. They could prepare whatever they liked, said the dragon, but if the meal was not ready in a week, he would start on the cities and towns. The peoples of the earth, the kings, the presidents and the ministers, the farmers, the factory workers, the office workers, they began to lament. Now what would happen to them? They would like to say the monster didn't exist. How could they say that? There it was, covering Australia, staring out over the countries of the world. Now the little boy Hogarth heard about this. Everybody in the world was talking about it and worrying about it. he was sure the Iron Man could do something. Compared to the space bat angel dragon, the Iron Man wasn't very big, of course. The Iron Man was the size of a tall tree. Nevertheless, Hogarth had faith in the Iron Man. He visited the Iron Man in his scrapyard and talked to him about the great monster that's threatening the Earth. "Please," he asked, "please, can you think of a way of getting rid of it? If you can't, then it's an end of us all." The Iron Man chewed thoughtfully on his favourite titbit, a spicy, juicy old gas stove. He shook his head slowly. "Please think of something," cried Hogarth. "If the space bat angel dragon licks all life off the Earth, that'll be the end of your scrap iron. There'll be no people left to make it." The Iron Man became still. He seemed to be thinking. Suddenly, his headlamps blazed red, green, blue, and white all at once. He stood up. In a great grinding voice, he gave his commands. Hogarth danced for joy. The Iron Man had had the most stupendous idea. The Iron Man would go out as the champion of the Earth against the monster from space. I think Ted Hughes might be having a bit of a go at people about the way they react to situations. Do you think? Do you think he's having a bit of a comment on when something bad happens, what do lots of human beings do? They fight. The space bat angel dragon lands on Earth, gives its demands, and what's the first thing they do? They fight. They try and fight it. They use force to get rid of it. And it doesn't work, not even slightly. They use all their money. They use all their resources. It doesn't work. So is this a bit of an anti-war book, do you think? This little chapter here is a bit of an anti-war message from Ted Hughes, passing his message on and saying, actually, there's a better way to do things. I wonder what the Iron Man's going to do. Actually, I don't wonder. I know exactly what he's going to do because I've read the last chapter. What do you think he's going to do? How could the Iron Man, who's as tall as a tree, take on something that is the size of Australia? Force isn't going to work. He can't beat it up. That's not the way it goes. We're not in the Marvel universe now. What's going to happen, do you think? Have a think about that. Is the best course of action always to be forceful or to come up with a plan that is thoughtful? Because I think Ted Hughes is making a comment more than just telling you a nice story here. I think there might be a message. Okay? Final chapter tomorrow.